Welcome back. Now, our quote of the day is very appropriate to our next guest. It's from Eric Holder. Here's what he had to say. Though this nation has proudly thought of itself as an ethnic melting pot, and things racial, we have always been and continue to be, in too many ways, essentially a nation of cowards. Well, that's not true of our next guest. His name is Larry Pinkney, and he's a veteran of the Black Panthers, and he actively fought for black rights. And he also, though, is not captive by skin color. His sense of justice and his sense of morality transcends skin color, and we're going to talk about that. Listen to what he said about Barack Obama. He says in an article on his site called Goose Stepping Behind Barack Obama, the Absence of Critical Thinking, he says, as aptly demonstrated by Germany and Italy of the 1930s, there's absolutely nothing new about a substantively uninformed and highly manipulated electorate, euphorically and uncritically lining up lockstep behind a political figure who's offering a dangerously superficial media soundbite rhetoric which indefinably calls for change. You know, we are often criticized for going back and talking about Hitler and talking about the Nazis and making these kind of comparisons, but you know, the Nazis were not only apocryphal, but they served as archetypes for oppression. And we see these patterns being repeated over and over again. And our next guest, even though he is actively involved with the Black Panthers, is not afraid to point out the similarities of the absence of critical thinking that is causing people to just line up behind Barack Obama because he's black or because he's a Democrat. So we're going to talk here in just a few minutes with Larry Pinkney, and he is a veteran of the Black Panther Party. As I said, he's also former Minister of the Interior of the Republic of New Africa. He's a former political prisoner and the only American to have successfully self-authored his civil and political rights case to the United Nations under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. He's a real fighter. Larry, welcome.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to meet you in person. I've heard you many times. Now, as we were saying, you're not locking up right behind Obama and marching in lockstep behind him just because he's black. You're looking at what he's actually doing. And unlike so many people on the left who develop kind of a selective barrier to any criticism once their guy gets in, you've been very outspoken about things that you've seen that you don't believe are right. Tell us about.
Well, absolutely. You know, I do not believe in being lockstep, as it were, behind anyone. The fact of the matter is that people have allowed themselves to be mesmerized, if you will, by Barack Obama. But they have not paid attention to what this man has done and is doing, whether we're talking about him bombing with his drone missiles Libya, North Africa, or Somalia, or Bahrain, or, I mean, Afghanistan. The list is almost endless. Somehow people have allowed themselves to ignore a reality that is dooming us as a people. When I say as a people, I mean black, white, brown, red, yellow people, everyday, ordinary people. We have, too many of us, have allowed ourselves to become unprincipled. You see, we must be principled. If we were out there protesting, and we should have been, and organizing against George W. Bush, can you tell me why it is we're not out here organizing and protesting against Barack Obama? Exactly.
Just today, Darren McBrain was saying, you know, looking at Rachel Maddow, and she goes in and she says, well, look, you know, we're finding out that they just did this and they did that and everything, but then, oh, but Bush did it. You know, and nobody said anything about it back then. It's like, well, she was criticizing it when Bush was doing it, but now she's offering it as an excuse that Bush did it. And you would see Hannity performing exactly the same function when things are reversed. He'll say, oh, well, you know, yes, of course, Bush did these evil things, but look, Clinton did evil things too, and he got away with them. So they're really kind of like, when I look at them, it's kind of like people lining up behind the Jets or the Giants. You know, they're actually both from the same city, they're in the same league, and they need each other to play the same game.
Right.
And the game that they're playing is dividing people up, and so that we don't, you know, we fall in, like you said, in lockstep behind our team, behind our party, behind our label of left or right or Tea Party or whatever, and we don't critically look at what they're actually doing.
You're absolutely correct. And look, the reality is that this is not a game. This is, we're talking about the very survival of everyday people on Mother Earth, on this planet, in this nation of the United States, and globally. And, you know, the power elite that run our lives in this country, whether they're banksters, whether they're the pharmaceutical corporations, whomever they are, the power elite nationally and globally, they understand this. We everyday people must understand this. The Democrats, the Republicans, I call them Republicrats because they feed from the same trough, the same trough. Their rhetoric may be slightly different, but their actions are essentially the same. And in the case of Barack Obama, he has far surpassed, in a negative sense, the terrible things that George W. Bush committed.
Yeah.
But Obama has far surpassed it.
And continued things like torture and Gitmo.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
you know, he was gonna stop that, but of course he didn't do it. And then he gave us things like the NDAA.
Right, right. Provision, especially Provision 1021 of the NDAA, which essentially makes null and void the right to due process. Yeah. I mean, imagine, is this, whether people get offended or not, let's be honest, let's be real. Is this fascist Italy with Benito Mussolini? Is this Francisco Franco's dictatorship in Spain? Or is this a country where indeed the Constitution is a living document that means something? Apparently, it doesn't mean anything anymore. And it's, I guess, okay now because we have a quote-unquote, heavy quotes around that word black, a quote-unquote black man in office. Excuse me, oppression is oppression, irrespective of who is responsible for the purveyance of that oppression. And in this case, it's incumbent upon us, I go back to what I had said before, to be principled, And one of the things that really I find most disconcerting, most disturbing, is that so many people on the so-called left, I say so-called, the so-called left, so-called progressives, so-called liberals, whatever, so many have decided to lose their principles, to selectively forget that which they claimed so loudly when Bush was in office. So I'm looking forward to a surge of everyday people. I think we're seeing that, frankly. I don't want to just be negative. I want to be very positive because I'm seeing people all around the world, all around this nation and the world, who are actually beginning to awaken. And that's heartening. As we said back in the day in the Black Panther Party, and I'm talking about the original Black Panther Party, we said all power to the people, all the people, black, white, brown, red, yellow. And this is something that we have to make a reality, and I see opportunities for that happening. We can break through this Obama trance.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned that because when you look at all the tactics that we see coming out and all these scandals that are broken in the last week or whatever, framing people, you know, dirty tricks as they called them back in the 1960s, 70s, counterintelligence programs that you were a victim of. We're seeing all this sort of thing repeated again, but now the interesting thing is that it's being done not to Black Panthers, it's being done to white, mainstream middle America and Tea Party people, right? And I'm reminded of that quote, the famous quote from Nazi Germany, since we started this interview with that, you know, Martin Niemöller, who said, you know, they came for this group and I did nothing, they came for that group and I did, then they came for me, you know? And for a lot of people, we're at that point right now. And they need to listen to you and see the kinds of tactics and things that our government was capable of doing to you. And at the time, they would say, oh yeah, it's this other group, and I'm not concerned about it because I'm not a part of that group, or I guess they deserved it or whatever because they trusted their government. Now, like you said, I think people are beginning to wake up. It's beginning so pervasive that a lot of people now, they can look at this and they can go back and look at your history and say, you know, well, maybe those guys weren't the bad guys that we thought that we were told that they were, right? You know, that they were framed, that different things happened to them. And along that line, we've got this march coming up, July 4th, as you're aware of probably, in Washington, D.C. And I'm reminded of the fact that one of the first things that the Black Panthers did that got a lot of attention was marching in with arms into a city council meeting. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, the Black Panther Party had a 10-point program, and I would urge people just to go to put in 10-point program, the Black Panther Party, it'll come up. So we believed in medical care, we believed in community programs, et cetera, et cetera. However, we also believed in the right to self-defense, okay? I believe the Second Amendment of the Constitution makes that right, it enshrines that right. for all of us as quote-unquote Americans. Now, I think that it's imperative, especially from my own history, to understand that we have to be able to defend ourselves. It's not just a matter of bearing arms. I think it extends into the area of defending ourselves. When the party was founded in October of 1966, it was first called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. I think that
because at that time, you were suffering the kind of stuff like we started out the news broadcast with. You see a couple who's in their house and the police demanding to come inside, and they say, "Where's your warrant?" And we don't have a warrant, let us in.
Right.
And breaking the door down and tasering them because they were filming them.
Right.
And now we're seeing that so pervasive, so widespread, but it was something that at the time was pretty much limited to inner cities and black communities, and you were feeling that, and you got together on a local level to try to defend yourself against the police because the system was not working. The government was not putting any rules of conduct on them, and now we see that pervasive.
Across the board.
Absolutely.
You see, and that's why I think we have a grand opportunity here. Irrespective of our so-called differences in perspective, we all come from different backgrounds. So what? We're going to have differences in perspectives. We don't need liars or robots. We need people to tell each other the truth and go from there. Right. You know, I'm pleased not about the terrible things that are happening, but I am very pleased that people are beginning to awaken. People are beginning to say, well, wait a minute. Now I see this other perspective. And we link the 60s, 70s, and 80s to right now, the year of 2013, because we are all in this together, like it or not, as we used to say, like it or not. We're in this struggle together.
That's
and,
right.
and we got to be in this to win together. You know, the corporate elite, currently headed by their chief spokesperson, drone man Barack Obama, the global and national and global elite really have a special weapon right now. And that special weapon is Barack Obama. But we are waking up, all of us, irrespective of color, irrespective of gender. This is a good thing. This is a necessary thing. And let me just say this. The counterintelligence program, a program set up to frame, to discredit, to imprison, and neutralize, and in many cases murder, the counterintelligence program is continuing today.
Oh, yeah.
It's continuing in various guises under NDAA Section 1021 in the Patriot Act, and as we can see in Obama's own kill list. Why, this president has his own very special secret kill list.
We think about Nixon, and he had his enemies list, right?
Right.
He was an evil person. Actually, he was an evil person,
right?
You know, but he's kind of the personification of this evil, calculating, murderous president because of the war in Cambodia and all these different things. And yet, Obama's got his kill list.
Right.
I mean, that's just absolutely over the top. They're out in public now about things that they used to do in secret and quietly.
Absolutely, you hit it right on the head. They're out in public about it now. So what does that tell us? It tells us that you know, they think they have us so dumbed down, so manipulated, so controlled that no matter what, we're going to accept it. I say, and I think more and more and more people are saying, wrong, we're not going to accept it. We are awakening, and we are going to do everything in our power together to resist, not only to resist, but to reverse this. If we're going to have a constitution, let's make it real. Don't have a piece of paper just for a piece of paper. Let's make it real. Okay, if we're going to have human rights, Obama's always talking about human rights in other countries. I wonder where he is about human rights right here, or his kill list. Okay, which, by the way, affects people in this country as well. Let's be real. That's what I mean when I say principled. Let's be principled. I don't have time for someone to say, I love him because he's black. No, I love someone, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, based upon the content of their character, not the color of their skin.
That's right. I was talking earlier about, in the news, about this leak that happened about the AP reporters, right? I think that's a good example of even the corporate-controlled media, government-controlled media, waking up. Because under the FISA Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, these were circumstances where they were talking, getting information to people in foreign countries. So the government has maintained, they're not even, like we're talking about them doing things openly, they're not even trying to conceal the fact that they record and all these different phone calls and keep them. So they've got all the information, the transcripts and everything. And when they come in and say, we want the phone numbers and the phone list of who they called, how long they talked, and so forth, they have the entire conversation already. So when they come in and do that, they're firing across the bow to intimidate now the big-time corporate media, the Associated Press. And this is galvanizing a lot of people, I think, to wake up. They're starting to say, oh, gee, I thought this was a conspiracy. They're just like Jon Stewart said the other day. He said, oh, I was laughing about these conspiracies, you know, but then he sees this, and it's kind of the wake-up call for a lot of these people.
Right. And you know, I like to say that those people who try to dismiss the reality, one, you know, there's a saying of just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean it's not happening, okay? I'm not paranoid, I see what's happening, and we need to all see what's happening. The second thing is that those folks who refer to us and others as quote-unquote conspiracy theorists, I like to turn around and let them know what they are. They are denial theorists.
Yes.
They're in denial.
Right.
It's our job not to be in denial because too much is at stake. You're right. The Associated Press, who knows whom else? I mean, if they've already, they meaning this Obama government has already done this, one can only imagine what else they have done and are doing, all in our name.
And they're totally in denial about surveillance, for example. Nobody wants to think about the fact that they live in something that is like 1984 on steroids. They've got every bit of electronic communication. And the last news article that we went over in the news was an article from Wired magazine, people who know the technology. And they're talking about if it was Watergate all over again, how would a whistleblower try to anonymously communicate in a way that the government could not monitor with somebody? And you wouldn't believe all the different things that you would have to go through and probably would still get caught.
Yes.
I mean, they caught the director of the CIA. They know what everybody is doing. So the idea that they would give this list to the AP, now in the time of Nixon, that might have raised some flags and said, oh, they're starting an investigation. It's like, they don't need to investigate. They've got it. They're just basically intimidating people. They're ruling by fiat and by intimidation. They're ignoring the Constitution. They're murdering people with drone kill lists. It's just amazing to see what's happening. And, you know, frankly, I don't expect that any of this would have been any different if we had had a Republican. They're just going down this same program. You've got cheerleaders even of most of what Obama is doing with the drone strikes and the likes of McCain and Lindsey Graham. They're all cheering him on. That's exactly what they'd like to see.
And so-called Democrats like Keith Ellison, supposed progressive.
Carl Levin.
Yeah, Carl Levin. Okay, these people, again, are unprincipled. They're not saying these drone strikes, for example, are wrong. They're just saying, well, how can we legitimize them? What can we do to cover them over? What can we do to legalize this? Well, how do you legalize murder? How does one do that? And as far as Mr. Drone Man, Barack Obama himself, we have to understand that these things, I say this again, is being done in our name. We're being attacked in our name, meaning by our very own government. Other people around the world are being attacked in our name. We have to ask ourselves, and I leave this up to the audience, who are the real terrorists?
Right. It galvanized people when Rand Paul got up and did his filibuster about drones. But one of the things I like about the Black Panther Party is that you weren't looking to have somebody solve all your problems for you. That's the reason we're in the situation we're in today. It isn't going to be some person at the top who's going to magically reverse all of these infringements on our liberties that are so systemic. And you see these agencies and the people in them, like the IRS, they transcend one administration to the next because they're the useful tool. It doesn't matter which president's in, he's going to use them in criminal ways. And sometimes it is so over the top that it gets people's attention like it did with Nixon and is now doing with Obama. But they all do it. There's all incidences of this happening. And so the system itself needs to be changed.
Yes.
And the way that we can do it, I think, is the way the Black Panthers did it, which is at a local level.
Right.
As local as we can go to control our lives, we have to want to control our lives at a local level, and we have to take control of our lives at a local level, and that was what the Black Panthers were about. Talk about that a little bit more. You mentioned it briefly at the beginning.
The 10-point program, there's a book called To Die for the People written by Huey P. Newton, but there are numerous books out now about the Black Panther Party. But we had a 10-point program. It was very simple. It wasn't intellectual masturbation. It was very simple, very clear-cut. Anyone could understand it. Food, clothing, housing, shelter, education, medical care. Now, J. Edgar Hoover at the time called that revolutionary. I'm thinking, dang, that's revolutionary? My God! You know, but my point...
Let me interject this. I think history has been much more kind to the Black Panthers than to J. Edgar Hoover. As time goes by, we're starting to see some real truth. Truth eventually comes out. And when you look at J. Edgar Hoover, somebody who was so drunk on power over so many decades, I mean, this guy was like an American Stalin. I mean, he was really a dangerous character. Very corrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. That's all right.
Go back to the 10-point. I just had to say that about J. Edgar Hoover.
Great point. We believed in, when I say we, I'm talking to Panther Party, Black Panther Party, that started in October of '66. We believed strongly in doing for self. We believe that we should serve the people, as the expression we would use, serve the people body and soul. That's why we had free health programs, free medical clinics, free food programs, free shoe programs, free senior citizens programs. So I can just go on, and these were national.
Let me ask you now, though. Where did the money for the free programs come from?
We went
from the community.
Right to the community.
Right.
We went right to the community. And our argument to the community was simple. You think the government's going to do it for you? They had to, you're right. We got to do it for ourselves.
Because if you do something like that at a local level, whether it's a community, small town getting together on that basis, or whether it's people in a church or something like that, it can work at a local level.
Yes.
It's when the more distant you get from the people, then you start getting in these bureaucracies where they start misallocating stuff, where they start to get sticky fingers, and the stuff that goes to them never goes back down to the people.
Exactly.
It just becomes a redistribution of wealth, not amongst the people, but from the people to them.
Exactly.
Essentially. So that's an interesting point, that you had a lot of things that initially a lot of people who consider themselves to be Republicans might balk at and say, oh, we don't want that being done. But because you were doing it at a local level, it made sense.
It did. It worked. It worked.
And people opted into it.
Yes,
right.
Yes. You see, this is one of the things, of course, that frightened the federal government, was they were thinking, oh my God, they're doing for self. They are actually working in their own quote-unquote communities, making these things real.
Because they want dependency.
Right. Dependency means control. You are manipulated, you are controlled. And that's, you hit it again.
They control and manipulate people who typically vote for the Democrats, because they make them dependent on the government for things like food and health care and clothing, or housing, I should say. They don't do clothes yet. No, not yet. That'll come. But for the Republicans, they make them dependent, the Republican voters dependent, because of a sense of fear, for security, you know?
Yes.
And so then we become dependent on the government for security. And how good a job do they do in providing a security? They don't. They come at us, don't they?
That's the whole point. The security is really security in reverse. It is actually, what they are promoting is insecurity and fear. Keep a people in fear, keep a people divided, keep a people not knowing one another. This is how you control people. And then they say, well, you have the vote. Albert Camus, the French philosopher, said, what good does it do to give a man a vote, or a woman, and then tell him he's free? Because you don't really control the system that puts those so-called candidates there. And so you're absolutely right. The fear factor, okay, is very, very strong. Obama has taken this to extremes. It didn't begin with him, but he's certainly taken it further than any other president.
And each president that comes along does that.
Yes.
We're almost out of time. Let me ask you real quickly for something that is kind of a current event that's coming up, and that is, again, this D.C. march. We mentioned it briefly. How do you feel about that? Because that's a real flashpoint. It's a dangerous situation when they go in and to confront the government when it's wrong. And in that particular situation, going in there with loaded guns, it was a D.C. law that was specifically struck down by the Supreme Court 5 years ago in D.C. versus Heller. It was an off-duty cop who wanted the ability to be able to carry firearms off-duty that sued. And for 5 years, they've continued to enforce this law that was struck down by the Supreme Court. So you've got these marchers who are going in there carrying loaded rifles, because that was the central point of that Supreme Court decision. And yet, We know how the government can use COINTELPRO, so it's a very dangerous flashpoint situation. What do you think about that? What are your thoughts?
I want them to be very, very careful. I think of when the party, the Black Panther Party, carried legally carried weapons, exposed, so everyone could see, and it was legal at the time in the state of California.
There were no laws, no local laws that were there.
Well, that happened after we did it. Then they came out with what's called the Mulford Act,
right,
which made it illegal. Okay, but I want them to be extreme. I'm sure they want to be extremely careful too. I want them to understand that they are going to try to infiltrate them. They are going to try to do every single thing. They're going to try to provoke something. When I say they, I'm talking about this corporate-controlled Obama government, Mr. Drone Man's government.
Very important, because you've seen all this stuff.
Yes.
You've seen the infiltration. You've seen the provocation.
Yes.
And you know exactly how they work. And they don't change their methods. That's why we keep telling people, look for a drill. You know, it's a key thing about the bombing. Look for a drill. That's something that demonstrates it's a false flag. You're talking about infiltration and provocation at a march. You saw all of that happen. What other types of things?
They are going to use their corporate stream media to disinform and misinform people. Again, going back to using the fear factor, okay? These things all combined are what they're going to try to do. I want these folks to be aware of these things. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying be aware, be cognizant of what, you know, you were facing. Back in the day in the 60s, a lot of us, you know, had no idea how vicious this government actually is, was and is, continues to be. But let's learn from history. I don't care if it's where the, you know, black, white, brown, red, yellow history. It's people's history. It's our history.
And this is very important, because a lot of the people who are going to be going to this are going to be typically coming from white America, you know, rural America, whatever. They're the ones who are most attached to the Second Amendment issue right now, who are willing to put themselves on the line, perhaps surrendering themselves to get arrested, having their firearms confiscated or whatever. They're dedicated to the cause, and I really admire them. But like you said, they don't necessarily know the history, because they haven't experienced it, of what you went through. And the government is going to do the same things to them that they did to you. So they need to be aware of this, like you said, not to tell them, not to pour cold water on it. What they're doing is very brave. And it comes to the point where you have to ask yourself, what else can we do about it? When they ignore the Supreme Court, which to them is the ultimate authority. I mean, I don't agree with what the Democrats typically say is a living constitution. I think the words mean what the words say. But they talk about a living constitution that, well, whatever the Supreme Court says the words mean, that's what it's now going to mean. Well, the Supreme Court ruled against them, and they still did what they wanted to do.
We don't have a living constitution. So I mean, you know, that is absurd.
But they even to appeal to their usual source of authority, they still denied it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. You know, if it weren't so serious, it would actually be hilarious. But it is very serious, and it's not funny. And again, I would urge people who are unaware of the demo that's coming up to make themselves aware of what those issues are, and to understand that they are affected. They are affected. And you know, I remember back in the day when the party was strongly standing up for self-defense in the communities. And by the way, we were allied with white groups, Asian groups, Mexican-American groups, the Chicana organizations. It wasn't just the Black Panther Party, contrary to how the mythology has continued to spread today. But I want people, and I hope people will pay attention to the larger issue and understand why these people are doing what they are doing. Don't say, oh, that's their issue. That's not just their issue. It's our issue. And we better look at it that way.
That's right. Even if you don't agree with that interpretation of the Second Amendment, you have to look at this and say, how can a city, our capital city, ignore both the Constitution and a direct revocation of that law that they've continued to enforce now for 5 years? Well, it's going to be interesting to see how that develops, and I certainly hope people will look at the history of what you went through personally. You were in prison for quite some time after the COINTELPRO operations. Look at the history of what they did with the Black Panther Party and learn from that, because they really do use the same playbook, unfortunately, over and over again. Thank you so much, Larry Pinkney.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, what Larry told us about not getting taken captive by the left-right paradigm is certainly true. The vital issues that we both agree on, even though we may disagree on a lot of side issues, the vital issues are the ones that really affect our lives and the lives of the community, the lives of the nation. A lot of these issues that they fight so hard on to divide people into left and right camps and along racial lines and that sort of thing are not the central issues that are going to make the difference. It's the ones that are about our freedoms, our constitutional rights, our liberty, and keeping the government under control, a government that will obey the law. That's what we all need to be concerned about. No matter what your position is on issues, you need to be concerned about a government that is out of control. And we're seeing it getting worse under every successive administration, whether it's Republican or Democrat. Well, we hope you'll continue to watch us here on InfoWars Nightly News. And if you're watching on YouTube, please consider getting a subscription to Prison Planet TV. You can get a subscription and pass it out to up to 10 friends at one time, can be watching simultaneously. Of course, you can hand it out to more people than that, but 10 people can be watching it simultaneously. It'll help people to wake up, and just as we had tonight, you can see that we've got a wide variety of people that come in here and talk about the issues that are important to us, civil liberties and freedom. Well, that's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.